Welcome back to the final brain bash, the mini brain bash. The vision, all the earth, one big village. That's what number 6 says to number 2 in The Chimes of Big Ben, as Leo McKern outlines what his desire is that the future of the village should be. Leo McKern actually said about this series, when he was asked, the idea gave enormous scope and was, to my mind, a quite brilliant idea. The writer of this episode, Vincent Tilsley, was one of the first contacted. And in 1973, he gave up being a scriptwriter and became a psychotherapist. And you may have met him when he came to our convention in Portmeirion. You may have met him when we did a mini greeting down in Brighton. He actually decided to take a brain bash himself. He was quite intrigued. He said to me, he said, what the prisoner was saying wasn't necessarily new thinking, but it was new thinking in a mass media. That was the clever bit. So, Chimes of Big Ben. There are arguments both for and against the suitability of screening Chimes of Big Ben to follow Arrival. In favour, it has a conventional plot structure that shares some of the characteristics of the pilot, focusing as it does on a new fellow prisoner and an escape attempt, while still posing philosophical, psychological and political questions. The script by accomplished writer Vincent Tilsley is strong and contains much humour, bringing another dimension and acting as an added incentive to watch. In addition, the episode's great strength is the presence of a radiantly confident Leo McKern as the boisterous and genial number 2, whose voice is as comforting as mellow brandy, whether bantering with the prisoner or discussing Nadia's possible intent on suicide. Whenever a poll is conducted of favourite actor, apart from McGowan that is, it's always Leo who romps in easily clear of all others. Another advantage, now that the prisoner has an acclimatisation to his situation, is that we witness a village induction from the detached perspective of the prisoner. He sees it objectively. Whereas in Arrival, it's all very subjective when we share his disorientation, the succession of mounting surprises and shocks. Here, our familiarity is very much established. At this point, the viewer is still yet unaware that the entire series revolves around probing the prisoner's mind in order to extract his secrets, his determination to escape, and his desire to face number 1. The viewer may well be forgiven for imagining these opening episodes are just a prelude to him escaping into the wider world for further activities. When the prisoner finally discovers he's never left the village at all and is still confined, it really is a very ingenious plot twist. The viewer has been treated to an imaginative episode that successfully retains the essential ethos of the evolving narrative of the series, whilst posing the question of who runs the village. In a way, The Chimes of Big Ben has its roots in the past, with direct links to the secret agent genre, yet it effectively bridges the world of the Cold War warrior and signposts the series' future allegorical direction. The episode continues where Arrival left off in the process of developing the sinister and malevolent nature of the village. We again see the group therapy conditioning room with its inhabitants undergoing treatment. Also seeing a shaven-headed man laying on a gurney being manoeuvred, presumably destined for some awful medical procedure pertaining to his brain. With the clever twist ending, Tilsley has introduced an element of uncertainty about what we witness being true. When analysed, the plot is not very imaginative and lacks complexity, only hinting at the deeper themes that in time we'll explore. But the script does emphasise both the psychological and political themes. The most important and significant concept that Tyldesley has introduced us to is the vision of all the earth, one big village. And this alone ensures the importance of this episode in the prisoner philosophical framework. The insertion of that key phrase will influence our view of the entire series as it progresses. Here, the village is portrayed as a symbolic representation of a society that is totalitarian in outlook and repressive in action. If the prisoner, shaking his fist in the air and exclaiming that he is a free man, is the single most powerful image that emotionally encapsulates the heart of the series, then the dark dread, the foreboding, is indeed that the whole earth as the village might actually come to pass. In a way, Mark Stein's vision of the prisoner escaping to the wider world did materialise, in the sense this phrase was seized upon by media commentators as it summarised the essence of the series, and it echoes on to this day, for the village is a metaphor for the totalitarian state. Number 2 welcomes this coming world, relishes it, as what any totalitarian state craves more than anything is a compliant and placid society. The populace are more easily controlled. The USSR under Stalin, for example, and others created this by fear. China by a less apparent fear tempered with economic prosperity. The deal is, in return for you, the citizen, keeping out of politics, we'll look after you. And we can all remember what happened in Tiananmen Square back in 1989. But you won't find that in China's history internally. Look at the daily international news, and there is no shortage of countries that qualify for this criteria. I spoke to Tyldesley. He said this phrase was a deliberate attempt by him to make a point, to issue a warning, because he was acutely aware of the growth of totalitarianism around the world, how fragile democracy is, and he sensed our society might succumb, if not politically, then through the dangers of capitalist big business consumerism. By taking an alternative path, rejecting a conventional career within the system, Vincent was better able to take an objective view of the world. Discussing the work of the psychologist Jung with Merlina, he expressed his philosophy succinctly. I think that Jung was tremendously aware of the inner self, which had to come forth, and that's what we're here for. Other people see psychology as enabling you to adjust to society by getting you to fit in. Those are two totally different points of view. I go for the first one. In other words, he's saying we should be true to ourselves, whoever we are, because we are all individuals. One could argue, actually, that Vincent, who I met a number of times, did become a free man. But certainly the latter view that he outlined is that required by totalitarian states, and really, perhaps to a variable extent in democracies. So, my bariometer score. A plot that's clear and quite accessible, with a genuinely satisfying and very clever twist ending that surprises the first-time viewer. Despite its one-dimensional narrative structure, its true strength lies in its succession of well-crafted, dialogue-rich scenes, many of which pose provocative, intriguing, or perhaps radical ideas and concepts, all specifically intended to encourage and challenge the audience to engage, consider and reflect. An episode that is message laden. Certainly, I think I would give it a 4-star, but for me, that improbable and interminable journey and its one-dimensionalism, I scale it back to 3 stars. I did do some research on whether it was possible to do that journey, and back in the early 1960s, someone got himself posted in a crate from London all the way to Australia, and a few years later, someone did it in the other direction. So it's possible, and I suspect that that's where Tyldesley got the idea from. But the people that actually did do it took food, water, and all sorts of things in their crates. So here's some points to ponder. Can a parallel be drawn between the ways the village uses and abuses its power to both misdirect and taunt the prisoner, compared to our own situation and the relationships each of us may have? How do you assess the use of power by those you come into contact with? And have you successfully adopted strategies for dealing with those who seem to wield too much power? Number 2, with the trickery the village used to convince both the prisoner and us he was somewhere he wasn't, how can we actually trust what we're actually seeing? The reality of the narrative is open to question, because what actually Tyldesley did was replicate the opening sequence of number 6 waking up in a replica of his own home. So why do we continue to watch the series? In the text regarding Jung's insight, where Jung talks about, I think that Jung was tremendously aware of the inner self, and that's what we're here for. Which path does the prisoner follow? How and to what extent can we follow that path for ourselves? Consider North Korea, China, no end of countries. You can separate them into the two. Tyldesley says in the chapter that I'm writing, imprisonment is a two-way thing, both by exterior forces and in our own psyche. Just by being alone with oneself, one can evolve, and Tyldesley certainly had. What he's saying is each of us is our own prisoner and our own warder. So do you think that that's what he's saying here? Tyldesley was making a point when he talks of the whole world as the village. He says, actually, it doesn't make a scrap of difference who runs the village. Do you think that he's right when he, for example, said to me, capitalism and communism, they're the great secular religions. Discuss. The word totalitarianism comes from being coined by Benito Mussolini in 1930s Italy. He coined the word totalitario, which it came to mean, as far as he was concerned, all within the state, none outside, none against. And that, as we know, led on to the USSR and other notable countries. The difference between the tyrants of old and totalitarian societies is, in the old times, you still had your own thoughts, but now the thought police want you. And George Orwell in 1984, of course, really put his finger on it. So thank you very much indeed if you've been watching the Brain Bashes. I hope you've enjoyed them. And I'd just like to say how much I hope we can all be back together again next year in Port Meriam with another Brain Bash. Take care, stay safe, stay well. Be seeing you.